Our next story slammer is Bonnie V. There you are.
Thank you. So I'm zinc, and he's copper. Zinc and copper sit side by side on the periodic table, just the same way we did in the lecture halls all through medical school. And in the same way that zinc's electrons get all caught up in copper's atomic orbit, I hitched my hopes to his vision, his confidence, his dedication to the path ahead. And even while I willingly contributed domestic, artistic, and creative energy, he set firm tracks ahead towards security and success. We collaborated and cooperated and bonded really easily. And together we forged a pretty attractive, durable container with no visible scratches or dents. And out of that came two amazing children, one all bells and cymbals, and the other a deep-toned singing bowl. And we had two brilliant careers, each of us performing at peak, a lot like well-lubricated valves and gears. He had a medical research lab. It was the first one in Idaho. Nights and weekends, he spent writing grant applications for funds to keep the lab open and papers to publish as evidence that the lab was worthy of further funds. So he kind of had a wicked, never-ending cycle going there. I had a clinical practice for children with cancer, and please, no sympathy here. Those days with our children gave motivation, inspiration, and direction to all of us, and I became a better mother for every day that I spent in clinic. He traveled the world presenting his data, and I traveled to workshops and seminars on how healing happens and what might be the connection between fear and suffering and why some die young. He was all about collecting evidence, and I was full of questions that had no answers. Divergence began to brew in our cauldron. But our commitment was a lot like a brass zipper, sturdy enough to hold things together reliably, slick enough to slide easily, rarely jamming or snagging. And in the same way that a brass zipper can outlast a worn-out garment, the fraying edges and thinning fabric of our union started to become evident long before the zipper gave out. We were just all about getting it done, only nothing was ever all the way done because there was always something more that needed doing, and that left no time for fun or imagination or relaxation or rest. 30 years in our bubbling crucible of productivity solidified his structure nicely, while I lost track of myself, quietly vaporizing away without noticing. I just love being alive. Curiosity and interest and fascination float out of me in all directions. And when I find a familiar frequency, I just want to connect. And then I'm all in. And before I know it, I've forgotten who I am or what I want. I just want to be part of the action, along for the adventure. As things began to cool down, he developed a nice burnished finish. People started commenting on his gentleness, his kindness, his generosity. And then people said, well, wait, those elements were always part of your essence, and now he's absorbed them into his way of being. And I just smile because he's better now than ever before. Back in chemistry lab, I remember waiting for the reaction to finish. And whatever's in the flask, determines the timeline. So I would have to sit and watch for the fizzing and the bubbling to settle down. And then I would wait for the solution to cool, and I'd look for what was left. And then I would weigh and measure. And it wasn't ever about anything lost. It was always about something entirely new. So I would weigh and measure what I got. And in this case, I can only treasure the transformation that happened. For almost 20 years now, I've lived happily on my own in a sweet little house, full of sunlight and silence. And just inside the front door, there's a long, narrow cabinet against the wall. At one end, there's a square of bright silk cloth with a carved wooden Buddha sitting on it. There's a big old Christmas cactus kind of leaning over his shoulders. You might see it as an altar. Sometimes friends who have been traveling bring small gifts to leave there. And if I have a concern or an intention, I'll write it on a little piece of paper and leave it at the Buddha's feet. And the seasons come and go. The candles burn down. The fresh flowers fade and die. But 3 items have been there since the very beginning: a brass singing bowl, a little brass bell, and a brass lotus flower fully open, holding my wedding band deep in its center. Attractions and reactions happen all the time, all around us, mostly unnoticed, some of them leaving no trace, but some of them yield results beyond measure.